HOA Karen tried finding me for camouflage paint, didn't know I trained special forces here. Entitled People Karen's Wetland Nightmare, how a tyrant HOA president created her own swamp. The sound of rushing water echoed through the shared green belt behind my house, and I knew something was terribly wrong. As I rushed outside that Tuesday morning, still in my pajamas and slippers, I found water gushing uncontrollably from what used to be my irrigation line, pooling across the communal grass and flowing steadily into the neighboring properties like a miniature river system. My heart sank as I discovered the source of the problem. The main irrigation pipe had been cleanly severed with what appeared to be professional-grade bolt cutters, and someone had actually taken the time to zip tie off the cut ends with heavy-duty plastic ties. This wasn't wear and tear from age or an accident caused by shifting soil. This was deliberate, premeditated sabotage. Standing on her back deck with her arms crossed and a smug expression plastered across her face was Karen Holbrook, our HOA president and the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer of all things proper and pristine. She watched me inspect the damage with the satisfaction of someone who believed they had just solved a major crisis, sipping her morning coffee from a mug that read "World's Best Neighbor," a gift she had undoubtedly bought for herself. When our eyes met across the flooding green belt, she called out in that shrill voice that had terrorized countless homeowners before me. "Too much water was being wasted on your ridiculous desert garden," she declared with a righteous tone that suggested she was speaking on behalf of Mother Earth herself. Someone had to take action for the good of the community. The garden that started it all. I should have known Karen would eventually target my drought-resistant landscaping project. 3 months earlier, I had invested $12,000 converting my backyard into an eco-friendly xeriscape garden complete with native plants, decorative rocks, and an efficient drip irrigation system that used 70% less water than traditional landscaping. Every permit had been pulled through the proper channels. Every HOA guideline had been followed to the letter, and I had even submitted detailed plans to the Architectural Review Committee months in advance. The Water Conservation District had featured my yard in their monthly newsletter as an example of responsible landscaping, and the local newspaper had done a feature story on water-wise gardening that prominently featured my property. But Karen hated it from day one. She claimed with barely concealed disdain that my modern approach to gardening disrupted the visual harmony of Oakwood Estates. According to her twisted logic, every yard needed to look identical with their cookie-cutter green lawns, despite our region experiencing its worst drought in 30 years and mandatory water restrictions being imposed throughout the county. She had sent me 17 different violation notices over the past 2 months, each one more ridiculous than the last. My decorative boulders were supposedly 3 inches too tall according to a subsection of the landscape guidelines that she had apparently invented. My native sage plants were the wrong shade of green for the community aesthetic. Even my mulch was deemed unacceptable because it wasn't the HOA-approved brand, a specific type that cost 3 times more than standard mulch and had to be special ordered from a supplier 2 states away. But cutting my irrigation line crossed a line that even Karen should have known better than to cross. The flood begins as water continued to flood the green belt, creating an ever-expanding pond that was slowly creeping toward multiple properties. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. The clean cuts on the pipe showed tool marks consistent with bolt cutters. The zip ties were heavy-duty industrial grade, clearly showing premeditation. And most importantly, Karen was still standing on her deck, admiring her handiwork like a general surveying a successful battlefield. What Karen hadn't anticipated in her zealous mission to stop my water waste was that severing a pressurized irrigation line doesn't just stop water flow to one location. The sudden pressure surge had caused problems throughout the shared irrigation system, and now water was bubbling up from multiple points across the green belt like natural springs. The grading of our properties meant that all this excess water had only one place to go, straight into the lower-lying yards, with Karen's perfectly manicured lawn sitting at the lowest point of our cul-de-sac. Within hours, her prized Kentucky bluegrass was completely submerged under 3 inches of muddy water. Her imported Japanese maple trees sat in expanding pools, their roots drowning in the unexpected flood. The decorative stone pathway she had installed last summer at a cost of $8,000 disappeared entirely beneath the murky runoff. And still the water kept coming, fed by the compromised irrigation system that was now hemorrhaging water at an alarming rate. Karen's fury. Karen marched to my front door that evening, her designer shoes squelching with every step, demanding that I pay for the damage to her property. She waved a hastily prepared invoice in my face, printed on her personal letterhead and filled with inflated estimates, claiming I owed her $15,000 for emergency landscaping services. Her voice reached a pitch that could shatter glass as she screamed about how my negligent maintenance of my irrigation system had destroyed her award-winning yard. She had actually prepared a PowerPoint presentation on her tablet, complete with before and after photos, showing the transformation of her landscape from pristine to swampy. "This is your fault," she shrieked, jabbing her finger at my chest. "Your irresponsible water usage has caused this disaster, and I expect immediate compensation." I calmly informed her that I had already contacted my insurance company, a plumber, and most importantly, the police to report the vandalism. The color drained from her face when I mentioned that my security cameras had captured some very interesting footage from early that morning. The evidence, the timestamp on my security system showed Karen entering the green belt at 4:37 a.m., carrying what appeared to be bolt cutters and a bag of zip ties. She tried to deny it at first, claiming the figure in the footage could have been anyone, but the video quality was crystal clear, showing her distinctive purple tracksuit and the monogrammed gardening gloves she always wore. When I mentioned I had already provided copies to both the police and my attorney, she switched tactics, insisting she had performed emergency maintenance to prevent water waste. Her story kept changing. First it was emergency maintenance, then it was community service, then it was her duty as HOA president to take decisive action. The police officer who responded to my vandalism report was thoroughly unimpressed with Karen's explanation. Officer Bradley, a veteran cop with 20 years of experience dealing with neighborhood disputes, listened patiently as she ranted about her authority as HOA president to take necessary action to preserve community standards. He then calmly explained that destroying private property was still a crime regardless of her position on the HOA board. He took statements from both of us and several neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath, including Mrs. Chen, who had seen Karen in the green belt that morning and thought she was doing legitimate maintenance work. The unexpected investigation. As days passed and Karen's yard remained a swampy mess, I received an unexpected call from the County Environmental Protection Division. Someone had reported potential violations related to improper water runoff and wetland destruction. Initially, I assumed Karen had tried to turn the tables on me, but the inspector who arrived seemed far more interested in the standing water that had accumulated across multiple properties. Inspector David Garrison spent hours documenting the flooded area, taking water samples with official EPA testing equipment, measuring the depth of standing water, and photographing the affected properties from multiple angles. He was particularly intrigued by the dramatic change in Karen's yard, which had transformed from manicured lawn to something resembling a marsh. He asked detailed questions about the timeline of events, the normal drainage patterns, and any recent changes to the landscape. I provided him with copies of my security footage, documentation of the vandalism, and the police report. He seemed especially interested in the fact that the flooding had been caused by deliberate sabotage rather than natural causes. The environmental team arrives. What happened next was something I could never have predicted in my wildest dreams. 2 weeks after his initial visit, Inspector Garrison returned with a team of environmental scientists and a stack of official-looking documents. They set up surveying equipment across Karen's property, took soil samples from multiple locations, and documented the presence of several species of waterfowl that had taken up residence in her flooded yard. The lead scientist, Dr. Rebecca Lawson, explained that the combination of altered drainage patterns, standing water, and the specific soil composition had created conditions that met the technical definition of a wetland. More specifically, the pooled water from the irrigation disaster combined with the natural slope and clay content of Karen's soil had formed what they classified as a Category 2 seasonal wetland. Karen watched from her living room window as the scientists marked off areas with bright orange flags and took photographs that would become part of the official environmental record. She made several attempts to approach the team, but they were operating under federal authority and couldn't be intimidated by an angry HOA president. The wetland designation. When Karen received the official designation letter via certified mail, her shriek could be heard 3 blocks away. According to the county's environmental protection ordinances, her property was now subject to strict wetland preservation requirements that were enforced by both state and federal agencies. She could no longer use pesticides or fertilizers within 50 feet of the designated area. Mowing was prohibited during nesting season, which ran from March through September. Any landscaping changes would require environmental impact studies and permits that could take months to approve and cost thousands of dollars in fees. The letter also informed her that any attempt to drain or alter the wetland without proper permits would result in federal fines of up to $25,000 per day and potential criminal charges under the Clean Water Act. The emergency meeting. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting that night, demanding the board take action to reverse the designation. She had prepared a 20-page presentation outlining what she called the conspiracy against Oakwood Estates and demanding the board hire attorneys to fight the environmental designation. But the county's decision was based on scientific criteria and federal environmental law. The HOA attorney, Mr. Peterson, explained with barely concealed amusement that there was nothing they could do. Federal environmental law superseded local HOA regulations, and the designation was based on objective scientific criteria. You've inadvertently created conditions that triggered environmental protections, he told the assembled board members. And now you have to live with the consequences. The irony was delicious. Karen, who had spent years terrorizing homeowners over grass height violations and unapproved plant choices, now couldn't legally maintain her own yard. Nature takes over the following months. Karen watched helplessly as her expensive landscaping disappeared beneath cattails and marsh grasses. A family of mallard ducks built a nest in what used to be her prize rose garden. Protected by federal law, she couldn't even shoo them away. A great blue heron took up residence in her backyard, wading through the shallow water and feeding on the small fish that had somehow appeared in her accidental wetland. Birdwatchers from across the county started showing up to observe the unexpected wildlife habitat, much to Karen's horror. The local Audubon Society even placed a historical marker at the edge of her property, recognizing it as an important example of urban wetland restoration. Karen tried to have it removed, but the marker was on public property and legally placed. The criminal case meanwhile, the criminal charges against Karen were moving forward, with the district attorney particularly interested in the premeditated nature of the property damage. The security footage, combined with the zip ties and clean cuts on the irrigation pipe, painted a clear picture of deliberate vandalism. Karen hired an expensive criminal defense attorney who tried to argue that she was performing legitimate maintenance as HOA president. But the prosecution countered with testimony from irrigation experts who explained that no legitimate maintenance would involve severing pipes and zip-tying the ends. The case made local news when security footage of Karen creeping through the green belt at 4:37 a.m. was played in court. The judge was particularly unimpressed with her claim that she was protecting the community from water waste while creating a flood that wasted thousands of gallons. I filed a civil lawsuit for the irrigation damage, seeking compensation for the destroyed equipment, emergency repairs, and the cost of re-establishing my xeriscape garden. My attorney also included claims for intentional infliction of emotional distress and abusive process, given Karen's pattern of harassment over my landscaping choices. The case settled for $30,000, which I donated to the county water conservation program just to add insult to injury. The donation was announced in the local newspaper, along with a photo of me presenting the check to the Water Conservation District Director. The election disaster. The final blow came during the annual HOA board elections. Karen's wetland fiasco had become the talk of Oakwood Estates, and her credibility as a leader was completely destroyed. She lost her position by the widest margin in HOA history, receiving only 2 votes, one from herself and one from her equally difficult sister who lived 2 streets over. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Mrs. Patterson, immediately rescinded all of Karen's frivolous violation notices and implemented new procedures to prevent future abuse of power. She also issued a formal apology to me and several other homeowners who had been targeted by Karen's reign of terror. The permanent consequences. The environmental protection status of Karen's yard remained permanent, as any attempt to drain or alter the wetland would violate federal law. Her property value plummeted by 40% according to the real estate assessment, and she couldn't sell the house because prospective buyers were frightened away by the environmental restrictions. The criminal vandalism charges resulted in 12 months of probation and mandatory community service maintaining public gardens, a fitting punishment for someone who had terrorized neighbors over their landscaping choices. The final irony. Karen stood at her living room window every morning, watching a great blue heron wade through her former lawn, tears streaming down her face as she realized her need for control had literally transformed her pride and joy into a protected swamp that she could never legally restore. The cattails grew taller each season, and the duck population expanded. Environmental groups celebrated her property as an example of successful urban wetland restoration, completely unaware that it had been created through an act of vandalism. Meanwhile, my xeriscape garden flourished, using minimal water and providing habitat for native wildlife. The Water Conservation District featured it in their annual report as an example of responsible landscaping during drought conditions. The lasting legacy. Karen's story became a cautionary tale throughout the county, shared at HOA training sessions as an example of how not to handle neighborhood disputes. Environmental law students visited her property to study the legal implications of accidental wetland creation. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the case, examining the intersection of environmental law, property rights, and HOA governance. Karen's wetland became a case study in several environmental law journals, though her name was changed to protect her privacy. The sweet justice 2 years later, Karen still lives in her house, surrounded by her accidental wetland. She has attempted multiple times to challenge the environmental designation, spending thousands on lawyers and experts, but federal environmental law is clear and unforgiving. Her former perfect lawn is now a thriving ecosystem, complete with native plants, migrating birds, and a small family of beavers that moved in last spring. The beavers have built a dam that further expanded the wetland, much to Karen's horror and the environmental agency's delight. The final word: every morning, as I water my drought-resistant plants with my repaired irrigation system, I can see Karen watching from her window. Her perfectly manicured nails, once used to sign violation notices, now tap helplessly against the glass as she contemplates the wetland that has become her prison. She destroyed my irrigation system to stop what she called water waste, but in doing so, she created a permanent water feature that will outlast both of us. The federal protection means that even after she's gone, her accidental wetland will remain, a lasting testament to the dangers of unchecked power and the beautiful irony of environmental justice. Karen's wetland nightmare serves as a reminder that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and those who try to control nature often find themselves at its mercy. Her perfectly planned community vision drowned in the very water she tried to save, leaving behind a legacy that no HOA violation notice could ever undo. The sound of rushing water no longer echoes through our green belt, but the gentle lapping of marsh water against Karen's back deck serves as a constant reminder that some mistakes create permanent consequences. And in the end, the tyrant HOA president got exactly what she deserved: a front row seat to the beautiful chaos of nature, courtesy of her own destructive actions.